Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in internet shitlords, and today I'm talking about something that happened on Twitter. Probably by the time this airs, it would have been a day or two ago, depending on when I post this. And basically, it was a group. Well, Gary Gygax. Let's go like this. Gary Gygax was accused of being a blatant liar, a fraud, and doing so only out of monetary greed by a bunch of guys who are liars, frauds, and do what they do out of greed. So there we are. This is, if you're expecting that it's going to be the usual suspects, that this is the woke attacking Gary Gygax. Well, they certainly have, but you should be clever about this, because when they attack Gary, it's rarely about him being greedy about making money or something like that. They go after him claiming, whatever, that he's sexist, racist, homophobic, or what have you. No, these are our supposed fellow OSR people that are the Bro-SR and Bro-SR adjacent people who, in fact, hate the OSR. They hate everything to do with the OSR, and their movement is an anti-OSR movement. It's the opposite of the OSR, It's diametrically opposed to the OSR. And on Twitter, these last couple of days, they began to post about Rule Zero. And that's another thing they also hate. They despise Rule Zero. Now, Rule Zero, I'm sure all of you know, but it's basically the idea that you can change the rules of the game. It establishes a kind of hierarchy of the game, right? Which says, these are the rules. There's also the Dungeon Master and there's the players. Well, the Dungeon Master is, in fact, the guy who runs his game. Oh, here's Meatball. Meatball is very interested in the politics of dungeon mastering. So the Dungeon Master is the guy that runs the game. He can decide to change the rules. If you don't like a rule, you can try to change it. That's the essence. It's not the complete details, but it's the essence. I'll get into more details in a second of what Rule Zero is. And if you somehow haven't watched my videos before now and still don't know what the Bro-SR is, it's a group of fake performative pseudo-reactionaries. Although I'm sure that there are some people in the Bro-SR that are real reactionary fanatics that are now joining, because this is a group that is trying to make it cool to say, hey, in the gaming world, there's these horrible leftists, so let's be the absolutely most abysmal version of the right we can be, and see if we get some people following us and buying our books by being that, and so they have this fake kind of macho style to them, and I say fake because their founder has never been proven to lift. And they have they encourage anti-Semitism. They do all this terrible, terrible stuff, and they are fanatical absolutists. Their belief is that there should be only one way to play RPGs, only one game that should ever be played. And after some time, because this was not an immediate process, the Jeffro Johnson originally started out thinking that he would be able to think up an Ur-D&D, a proto-D&D that was the truest, purest form of D&D based on the earliest scraps of notes from Gary Gygax or something. But then he kind of gave that up because I guess he found out game design is hard. And he ended up just saying, oh, you know what? First edition was the one true version of D&D all along, even though it is not even the earliest form of D&D. It is the perfect edition, before which everything is flawed and after which everything is flawed. And people should only ever play first edition. So this is, additionally, you must play first edition the way he tells you to play it, right? So these guys hate Rule Zero. The problem is Rule Zero is everywhere. It's in first edition. Gary Gygax approved of Rule Zero. So they suddenly have a great problem because Gary Gygax, the funny thing is that when Jeffro started out, he wasn't an AD&D fan as such. He was a Gygax fanatic, right? He saw Gary Gygax as one of those, the divinely inspired creator of the RPG and of Dungeons and Dragons, right? And most importantly, as the guy who was divinely inspired to make a list of books in Appendix N, which he considers to be somehow now the only true defining books of the West. Those are the only things you need to read to be a Western man, even though most of them were only published in the 20th century, and anything else, and using anything else as a source for RPGs was bad, right? As inspiration for RPGs was bad. Whether it was stuff that came after, like Game of Thrones, or stuff that came before, like the Arthurian legends. Anything else is wrong to him, and that was always his deal. He wanted to be the guy that got to claim that everything, that only his way and anything else is wrong always, right? But his argument at one point rested on the idea that Gygax was the perfect game designer, and that it was his genius. And now this was when he was trying to get to the D&D. He was suggesting that the original pure D&D that Gygax had thought up was the perfect D&D, and that everything that came after were commercialized deviations, degeneration over editions from that perfect pure D&D that was once played in Gary's basement. And that at least has a bit more coherency than to say that, no, Gary Gygax was a scam artist and a grifter who was basically trying to just make money for himself and willing to do whatever he needed to do to get rich quick from the moment he founded TSR up until just before he published First Edition. Then during First Edition, he was God incarnated directly in Gary. Gary just typed without even seeing what he was typing, and he created the perfect RPG that is infallible in every way, to the point that you must never play it in any way other than the complete rules how Jeffro himself interprets it. And then suddenly, right after, he was back to being a worthless, grifter. That's the essence of his argument now, which is just so. It requires so much more suspension of disbelief. It's proof that his movement is a cult, and that the cult is pretty advanced at this point, because they're basically willing to believe, like if you believe that, well, then you believe in alien clams, and space Jesus and whatever else, like there isn't a cult you could join that you wouldn't be able to be a true believer there. So now what their problem is that Rule Zero is in D&D. It's inherent. It's there. Gary Gygax has said it. For a while, they were just trying to be in kind of denial. There was all this time when they were going, no, there is no Rule Zero in AD&D. And then when people point out exactly when Gary Gygax, it's not stated that the word Rule Zero isn't there. But Gary Gygax says over and over again in different parts that you can adjust it to whatever way you think is right. He has there are repeated instances where he does this. So now they've just decided, well, instead, what? This is the deal. So this is what they stated, was that, in fact, Gary Gygax did talk about Rule Zero all the time. But you know what? It was just because he was greedy and wanted to make money. He didn't care if you ruined the RPG hobby by not playing AD&D the way a guy 40 years in the future was going to tell you to play D&D. It was just that he wanted to make cash, and he thought that gamers are lazy, and that therefore, if you have a Rule Zero, people will be more likely to buy the product. None of that makes any sense at all, of course. It's really, really stupid thinking. But it's the kind of thing that they can now come up as I'll admit it's a more credible excuse than Gary was an evil, villainous retard. Then suddenly he was the direct prophet of God himself, and then suddenly he was back to being an evil, villainous retard, right? Like that's not the best argument either, So they're going with the best thing they can, which is to throw Gary under the bus in order to preserve the supposed purity of AD&D. But it still doesn't do that, right? Because if they're not denying, now they're just suddenly saying, guess what? It's not rules as written. Right? Because the rules as written tell you can change the rules. So now we have to tell you, no, you cannot play AD&D First Edition rules as written. You have to play it with one of the rules put in there as not written. You have to pretend that Gary never said that, because he was lying. And it was there and only there that he was lying. As a point of fact, what we actually have as historical evidence about AD&D based on people who knew Gary Gygax, people who played at his table, all of that stuff, is that wasn't the lie, right? Nothing that Gary did was really a lie, but the lie was saying, well, this is the definitive version of D&D, the way it should be played, if he ever said those exact words. Because he never played AD&D First Edition rules as written. He never played it with all those rules. Those were rules that were set up to be able to carefully adjudicate play in gaming tournaments. That's what AD&D First Edition was basically created for, was to be able, especially the stuff in the DMG, was to allow to have a uniform code of adjudication for people playing in one-shot sessions at D&D conventions, which is, by the way, has a totally different set of needs than running a long campaign, which is why Jeff Rowe Johnson can't successfully run a long-term campaign. Yeah, and none of the other Bro SR people can either, because they're using the wrong system to do what they think they're supposed to do. All of the really long campaigns, Greyhawk, Blackmoor, all of those were run with something other than AD&D First Edition. Think about it, right? they were run with the earlier versions of D&D and the pre-publication versions of D&D. So the Rule Zero is something that they hate, but they don't just hate it out of this kind of dogmatic reason of, we believe that the game is pure, holy written, must not be changed. They also hate it because they understand something. I don't know if literally, but subconsciously at least, somewhere in their lizard heads, they've caught on to something which is true, which is that Rule Zero is the mother of all game design, right? Rule Zero, this idea that we don't have just one game that you play with one set of rules. Like people say, well, chess is played in one way. Yes, chess is played in one way, right? That is chess, and if you change the rules, it's some other thing that's not chess. But that's not what D&D is or how it was designed. It's not part of the tradition that comes out of wargaming. It's not any of that, right? This is not that kind of game. RPGs are a genre of game, just like there are multiple versions of poker, for example, and people can come up with new variants of poker, right? Texas Hold'em was not a popular variant of poker for most of my lifetime, and then it became the most popular variant of poker. Whereas 5-card stud was once the most popular variant of poker, and today hardly anyone plays it. Unfortunately, I think 5-card stud is a much better game, but there we are. So the fact that you don't have a set of rules that say this is the only way to play, and instead you have a set of rules that says, well, the DM can change what he wants. So that means that at the table, games are going to be run a little differently. The DM can decide to run things different than in his table than somebody would in another table, both in the areas where there are gaps in the rules, as well as in areas where the DM might decide that this rule doesn't fit for the type of campaign I'm running. But beyond that, if the DM does that enough, eventually his product becomes a different game. And then, continuing that, those products become other games. Yeah. So there's a lot of people whose RPGs, so very big RPGs, started out as a variation of an earlier RPG that they were playing and modified. That is, for example, how Kevin Siembiada came up with the Palladium system. At first, it was his D&D game, and then he went along changing some rules and ended up creating the Palladium fantasy system. That's also how the precursor, Malian Wizard, the precursors of GURPS happened, and so people start thinking, well, what if we change this? What if we change that? And they're doing it in actual play. Now, of course, there are some people that's not their process, especially nowadays. There are some people that just say, well, I'm a brilliant guy, and I'm just going to design a game in my head, and these are going to be the rules. But even those are all still based off of existing games. Hardly any RPG is not inspired by existing games. It's a lot dumber to just try to make one whole hog, as it were, without it actually being a product of play, because those games will tend to have problems that are based on you having created an abstract design that doesn't actually work that well in practice. You have to be a really experienced game designer to just be able to open a Word file, start typing, and creating a game that is actually going to be able to do exactly what you want it to do in the actual play table. But of course, a lot of those theoretical game designers, let's call it, they don't really care if anyone ever plays their game. So the Rule Zero concept is the beginning of the idea of there being thousands of different RPGs, and this is how it was in my case with, like, in my Dark Albion campaign. It started as a Lamentations of the Flame Princess game, and gradually I started to realize that there were a whole bunch of parts of the rules as written in Dark Albion, in Lamentations, that weren't giving me the exact experience I wanted in the medieval authenticity of Dark Albion. So, for example, you've got XP for gold. Okay, but that doesn't make any sense in an authentic medieval context, because there are some people for whom it's almost, it would be a humiliation for them to be going around hoarding pennies in order to get experience points. That it doesn't fit the heroic genre of the Middle Ages. Has no room for the idea of somebody being, a money-grubbing guy that's going to rob a corpse to steal a penny, And and obviously holy men of any kind, knights and lords could not, it would be scandalous for them to behave that way. So that had to change, right? There had to be a different system, and it also shouldn't necessarily just be based on killing opponents or combat, right? So I changed the system and I created a system that's a kind of a milestone system where, actually the best way from my point of view was to just have people be able to play out their medieval authentic characters the way that they felt right. And then everybody just gets experience for actually, surviving, right? Because let's face it, the Middle Ages, that was the biggest goal, was just to come out of it alive, right? So there you go. That was one example. But I mean, I ended up changing so many parts of Lamentations. I said, well, this is a different game. I'm going to start thinking of something else. And that became the Appendix P rules in Dark Albion, and that became Lion and Dragon. My house game became a published, a platinum bestseller published RPG. And that is exactly the thing that the BroSR hates, because it takes away from their attempt at control and hegemony of this tiny corner of the hobby that seems so ridiculous and stupid of them to even be trying to do. But there you are. That's their opposition, And I've also seen in this same conversation people saying, well, Rule Zero is just lazy. It's just people who don't want to bother to learn the rules. That's actually part of their argument against Gygax. They're saying Gygax didn't care if people played his game or even read his book as long as he sold it. Well, nobody is going to buy a book or be thinking of buying a book and saying, well, wait, do I have to know all these rules? Oh, yes. Okay. So then I'm not going to buy this. Who would buy it if they had the exact same rules but said, oh, well, look at this. It says I can just change rules as I go along. Well, that means I'm going to buy it. Like the likelihood of that happening, if you see a book with the number of rules that AD&D has, you're probably really interested in knowing about all of those rules and working with them, right? There's nobody who's going to be excited enough about D&D, but so-called lazy that they're going to balk if they feel that they don't have to that they have to learn every single rule, And of course, the claim that Gary put it there as a way to get people to buy his products because those people would be lazy makes no sense, because it is also a fact that there are parts, because AD&D is far from a flawless product. It's a product that was clearly written over many different periods of time, over a lengthy period of time rather, and that was and that has a whole bunch of contradictions. And one of those contradictions is that Gary Gygax in many places says you can change the rules the way you want, and in other places says these are the official rules, they must not be changed. He says both of those things, And I don't think that was him hedging his bets either. That was him writing at different moments in different contexts at different situations, and he didn't care that both of those ended up being in there, not because he was some kind of grifter, but because he was creating a product that he understood to be a kind of a compilation product. And so there are, like, that in itself is a multiple choice option, right? You can run the game saying we will play only exact rules as written, or you can run the game saying, well, you know what, the DM will change things. And then you hear all these arguments from the BroSR people about, well, first of all, that Rule Zero is just something for lazy people, right? It isn't. Like, Rule Zero doesn't say you shouldn't know the game. Rule Zero says, if you know the game and the game doesn't make sense for what you're doing, you can change it. So in fact, anybody who uses Rule Zero, like, you could say, yes, of course, there are bad DMs. There are bad DMs that even if, but these people wouldn't care if Rule Zero wasn't in the rule book, right? If you got a rule book that doesn't say anything about Rule Zero, if you got a rule book that says you must play the game as written, and you have a lazy DM, you have a DM that isn't actually very good, he'll go looking through it, flip through it a little bit, and go, I know the gist of it, and then he'll just start playing, doing whatever, regardless of whether the author gives you permission or not, right? That's irrelevant. He'll do that, right? But in order for Rule Zero to actually work, yes, of course, you have to know all the rules. In fact, the idea that all rules must be followed as written is itself a lazier option than saying you must actually know the rules well enough to know why they do what they do. The idea you must follow rules as written means that if there's a couple that people can just kind of read the gist of it, and then if any time that there is some point of discussion or debate, or more likely when some guy wants to try to rules lawyer, then everybody can just open the rule book and start the Talmudic scholarship of figuring out how to interpret that rule in the way that lets them win, right? That's the lazier way than saying, well, a DM actually has to know all the rules so well that he can understand what rules he has to change to make his campaign better, his specific campaign. So that's all a stupid, the claim that this is laziness is a stupid argument. And fundamentally, there's one other thing they hate about Rule Zero, and this perhaps more than anything else. And it's something that proves that the BroSR, just like the BroSR, are right-wing identitarians, anti-Semites who are exactly like the left-wing identitarian anti-Semites. Their beliefs about RPGs are exactly like the woke story gamer crowd. It's so funny because the woke story, there is a traditional hierarchy, a hierarchy of power, let's say, in the RPG hobby. And that hierarchy traditionally has players at the bottom, the rule second, which includes the game designer, right? The game designer and his rules are second. And at the top is the dungeon master. Now, groups like the Forge, story gamers, woke D&D hates this, right? Because it means that the guy who is at the top might not be woke, right? If it's game designers and then you have like a list of banned game designers that you're not allowed to play, then suddenly all of the game designers who are at the top are going to be woke, and therefore all games will be woke. So they make a great effort to want to change this. In their view, the actual, the hierarchy puts the game designer at the very top with his game rules, and then below that are the players and then the DM, And in Jeffro's version, in the BroSR version, it's pretty much the same, with the exception that it puts Jeffro Johnson of the BroSR at the very top. Second, up till recently, second was the rules. Third, up till recently, was Gary Gygax. Maybe now he's been demoted further down in the celestial hierarchy of the BroSR cult. And then after that comes the DM and the players, who are equally pawns of the game as interpreted by Jeffro Johnson. That is the hierarchy of authority from the BroSR. So you notice that they share this with the woke people. They both believe that you are too stupid to make decisions about your own games. You need someone else to be in charge and decide for you, right? Which is to say, the authorized game designers. In the case of the woke, it's the top in crowd of the woke designers. They have their own little wars that they go through to determine which in-group are the ones that people should be listening to. in the case of the Pro SR cult, it's Jeffro. He's the only and ultimate authority, and everybody else must follow his divine word. So this is Rule Zero puts a huge damper on that, right? Because by Rule Zero, the other thing it does, besides being the mother of all game design, is that it is the seal of the ultimate authority lying in the hands of the DM. And that is what I believe, and that is what most of the OSR believes. Because also you can't really believe that there should be a wide variety of games, because at least, the one thing I'll say is that there's a certain coherency with the Pro SR, right? If you believe that there's only one pure game, then there must be only one pure arbitration, and therefore you can have this idea that Jeffro is the only authority, that you must go to him. He is the holy prophet Muhammad, right? And only his word can be the true interpretation of what this Grifter Gygax wrote in first edition. But if you believe in the concept of there being multiple RPGs, then by definition, the game master can't be the supreme authority. The supreme authority has to be devolved down and therefore decentralized into the level of gaming groups. And the DM is the ultimate authority. Now, obviously, the game designer might be, as an individual game designer, might be the ultimate authority on the game he himself wrote. If you have a doubt about a Lion and Dragon question, my first thing to you would be to say, well, if you're the DM, you should decide how you run Lion and Dragon, and you can feel free to change whatever you like, But if that is not a satisfactory question, a satisfactory answer to your question, I might do my best to try to give you a framework there, right? To say, okay, this is how I would do it, But of course, in Jeffro's case, that doesn't work for him either, because he didn't write AD&D first edition. He hasn't written anything. He doesn't have the ability to. So all he has the ability to is to usurp another man's work. That's what he's doing here. So anyways, that's basically what's going on right now. And what I mainly wanted this video to be was an understanding of exactly what Rule Zero is and why it's so important and why people fight about it. And I hope that I've done that. So if you like this video, please share it. Please send it to anywhere that you think people will find it interesting or that people will get pissed off about it. And if you want to support me, well, you can. The best way you can support me right now is basically by buying my products. I do have a Patreon page. If you're one of these people that loves my channel but doesn't actually game for some reason, well, you can support me on Patreon if you like, or by super thanks or super chats or stuff like that on YouTube. Now that that's available in my country, and mainly though, I think the games are the way to go. Stuff like Star Adventure, which is an incredible OSR space opera sci-fi RPG for just $9.99 in print. World of the Last Sun, if you like stuff like Mystara and the Hollow World or Rifts or or I don't know, Rick and Morty or Adventure Time, there's a lot of influences here. You will probably love the material in World of the Last Sun, which can, it's a game setting, but it's also full of stuff that you can take out, and that and the Gonzo Fantasy Companion are full of stuff that you can put into any OSR game. The genius of the OSR is how compatible it is. And Dark Albion Cults of Chaos, which I'm sure you guys have heard me say many times, I think is probably the best system work I've ever done. It is a guide to, it's not a guide, it's a generator to creating evil, sinister cults and enemy groups that you can use in any game. But of course, it's especially designed for medieval authentic games. It means you're going to get some really weird stuff in there, some really great stuff. And you can make basically an entire adventure and a full group of nemesis for your player characters in maybe 10 minutes at the most. And every time you do it, it'll be different. So be sure to check that out too. And all my other products, RPG Pundit Presents number 109, Medieval Dream Magic is out. It's a complete system of magic for the magic of dreams that you can use in any OSR game. Keep your eye out on the rest of my products. Heroes and Villains of the Silk Road, I just did the video about it before this one. If you haven't watched it, check it out to see how awesome it is. And I guess that's it. Currently smoking. This is a Stanwell Deluxe Apple with Argento Natural.